There are three problems with me testing things like the image quality and the stabilization features on the new GoPro 9 in the UK in October.
And there'll be some heavy rain around as well. Numerous amber rain warnings from the Met Office.
Over the last 2 days I have run both an obstacle course race and the London Virtual Marathon, and both were ideal opportunities to test the camera. It was a little wet. Number two, my enthusiasm for putting together a rig so I can compare all my different cameras versus each other. It's a bit low, to be fair. And number three, I just don't really care. I have used just about every GoPro ever made all over the world and filmed all sorts of stuff. And to be honest, unless you're putting an advert together for Red Bull, they have been good enough for a long time. For 99% of the things that I'm filming, my concern about the image is, what am I actually filming? Is it entertaining? Am I including enough different points of view? You can have the most beautifully clear, high resolution, well stabilized image, but if it's just you on your helmet cam, filming yourself going through a forest on your mountain bike for half an hour, anybody is going to fall asleep watching it. You can colour grade to your heart's content afterwards in post, it's boring. What I do care about is the real world stuff, whether you are using this thing to film your kid on the beach or whether you've got it strapped onto your head for your first ever bungee jump, where your biggest concern is probably, am I going to vomit all over it, and not, did I pick 5K so I can crop in afterwards? So, here are my top 6 pros and cons, real world, for the GoPro 9. This is the GoPro 8, and I do not know what they were thinking of when they designed the battery door for this thing. So first of all, the door does not even open up to vertical, so it is pretty much impossible to get the battery out without your hand touching the door. At which point, the door will happily eject itself for no apparent reason. And I'm not kidding, that does not take much effort to do that. I will demonstrate again with my smallest of fingers. Who designed that? Ridiculous. So it is borderline impossible to get the battery out or the SD card out without the door removing itself from the camera. And in here, indoors, that's mildly annoying. In the ocean, treading water, in a field of mud, on your mountain bike, or on a paddleboard, or in a kayak, that is going to ruin your day. And if you get mud or dirt on this thing, it is not going to seal properly, it won't close fully, and if you drop it in water, it sure is not going to float. And before you say we don't need to open the door under those conditions, you often do. To replace the battery, obviously, or put a new SD card in if it's full up. But also, occasionally this thing will freeze up, and the way to fix that, annoyingly, is to pull the battery, pop it back in again, and you're good to go. You're good to go unless your battery door is now sinking to the bottom of the ocean. It also closes with a 2-stage process. You have to first push the door down and then slide the locking mechanism across. And I'm never 100% confident in that, especially if I'm about to submerge the thing in water. GoPro 9 has solved all those problems completely. Firstly, the door opens up clear of the battery compartment, so you can get your hand in there without needing to touch the door in the first place. It closes with a reassuringly solid one process click, and when you do want to detach the door, it comes off with a reassuringly sufficient amount of force. It's not coming off by accident. All the door problems completely solved. It is a bit of a lump. Now the 8 was bigger than the 7 before it, and the 9 is significantly bigger again than the 8. In fact, it's actually heavier than the GoPro Max. Now, when this thing is attached to your chest mount, or it's on a short selfie stick, or it's attached to a bike or some sort of vehicle, it's completely irrelevant, you don't notice it. In fact, if you're using it as a sort of point and shoot, it actually feels quite good in the hand at this size, almost like a miniature compact camera. I'd happily carry this around on a city break or something to take snaps with, especially if I was somewhere that I didn't want to be getting out a £1,000 iPhone and flashing that around. It's also got the detachable lens back, so we can forgive it a little bit of its depth because that's well worth having. And just like the 8 before it, It has the very cool little feet that pop out, so you don't need to add any additional bulk to it by putting it into its own cradle. But if you attach this to something like a head strap or a helmet mount, or the out front helmet mounts, wingsuit styly, that's a big lump moving around. I've tried it on a head strap and it is uncomfortably heavy. A head strap is how I like to use the 8 when I'm filming things like an obstacle course race, because chest mounted it can get bashed against things. It is uncomfortably weighty on that, and on a cycle lid, especially if I'm off-road and it's bouncing around, it actually moves the helmet around too much. The 8 is probably the point at which GoPro peaked with the weight and size and features combinations. When they announced that the 9 was going to have a screen on the front, I thought, what a completely pointless feature. 100% wrong. Absolutely love it. Now the 8 did have a screen on the front that showed you what settings were being used and so on, but it's tiny, it's hard to see, and obviously it doesn't show you what you're filming. The 9 is better in every way. If I'm using it chest mounted, I can flip it up and see what I'm filming. I can see what settings I'm using. The same if it's out in front of me on a selfie stick. And stating the obvious, framing is just made so much easier. A number of times I've set it up, I want to see how I'm going to appear when I'm talking to the camera, especially when I'm trying to decide whether to use linear or wide or super wide. Those were things that with the 8, I just have to film and hope it was coming out okay. On the 9, I can now see exactly how it's coming out okay, because I can see how it's going to come out. The touch screen. Firstly, it's mildly annoying that the display is not identical on 7, 8, 9. When you go into the settings, the format that you see is a bit different each time. If you're jumping between cameras, that's not ideal. And it is not, and it never has been, super responsive and accurate. Now maybe it's because we're used to having a smartphone where it is pinpoint accurate, that this just feels a bit 10 years ago. Now again, it's one of those things that indoors now, in here, in the dry, it's fine. I can move it around. It might take me a couple of swipes sometimes, but I can get the job done. But outside, in less than ideal conditions, maybe I'm wet, maybe the camera's wet, maybe I'm wearing gloves, maybe I've only got one hand free because I'm holding onto my bike or my paddle in the other hand. There have been times where I've wanted to change the settings and it's just not been worth my while to try. I just hit record and use whatever setting it's already running in. The best comparison is why I don't use an Apple Watch for when I go out and do my sports timings, because this swiping nonsense on the Apple Watch when it's pouring with rain is a waste of time. With my Garmin, I can hit buttons. I know they will work 100% of the time, every time. In an ideal world, maybe they could have hard buttons that could be optional, turn them off, turn them on, use them to change settings and select. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, just to scroll through options and pick the one you want. Not an ideal world. Battery life is brilliant. Now admittedly, it's at the expense of it being a physically larger battery than is used in previous GoPros. And annoyingly, it doesn't therefore fit into the docking station I have for my existing GoPro batteries, which is annoying because the GoPro Max battery, which is also a physically larger battery than the GoPro 8, does fit into the same dock, but it is worth it for the extra longevity. This thing just lasts. GoPro talk about it lasting an extra 30%, not sure about that, but I used it on a 2.5-hour obstacle course race, a 5-hour virtual marathon. I was pacing my brother, hence it took a bit longer. It's his first marathon. And I didn't have to change battery once. In fact, I didn't come close to it. In fact, I actually have 2 of these batteries. I bought a spare. I've not used a spare yet. I've added a decent sized SD card to this thing and it is now going to last for the vast majority of events that I might want to use it for. Image quality. I know I started off by saying I don't really care, but they have absolutely nailed it. 5K onboard horizon leveling, Timewarp and Hypersmooth 3.0. When the 8 came out, I did a review of it because they called it, GoPro called it, the gimbal killer. And I compared it to running my 6 and 7 GoPros in a gimbal versus the 8. And my conclusion was pretty adamant. It was not better than a gimbal, not by a long shot. That is no longer the case with the 9. Does that mean that the 9 is better than a gimbal? No, a gimbal is still better, but the difference is not significant. And given the inconvenience of lugging a gimbal around, my gimbal is now for sale. In summary, GoPro 9, is it perfect? No. Is it about as good as you can get? Yeah, it probably is. Bigger question is, if you've already got the 8, is it worth upgrading? If you like it, the answer is probably no. If you enjoy using the 8 and have no problems with it, this is almost as good as you can get. But if you are using this and you are finding that the battery life is not quite what you want, that every time you open the door, it flies off, and you simply want the best, then yeah, GoPro 9 is it.